Hi guys, it's Jennifer with Gilman Creations. Today we're going to work on this card. First we're going to start with a few different pieces. Just the basic card base, a liner, the topper, a adhesive backed piece of foil tape, navy blue grosgrain ribbon, and a scratch piece of paper. We're going to use the Doris Clocks embossing folder for the card base, topper, and then we're going to use the Cuttlebug diamond plate for the foil tape. Now that they're embossed, let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do is work with our paint for the foil so it can dry as we're working on the rest of it. So what I'm using is the Tim Holtz Distress Paint Antique Bronze. It comes in a couple other metallic colors, brushed pewter and tarnished brass as well. Got to give it a good shake. Okay. Dab it off onto scratch piece. Okay. And then off we go. Now the joy of this is since it's supposed to look old and vintage and we're going to wipe it, then it doesn't matter how neat and clean and pretty you get this done. Really all we need to do is just kind of highlight the texture. It does slightly push down on some of the texture, but it does it as a way to give an indentation on it for those different pieces, which I think looks great. I did realize on a card I did before of this, it had been done for a while, and it was just the pieces sat to the side after I'd painted them. But I realized that there was too much paint, it hadn't been wiped off, so I reapplied this, and it actually took off some of the paint so that when it was done it didn't seem as heavy, which was really good. Okay, so now we're going to go through that and just start wiping with paper towel. And with the edges, it doesn't matter because those are going to wrap around our card base topper before we attach it to the base. Okay, we're going to set that to the side and clean off our mess. I'm just using my stamp cleaner to clean off my glass mat. Now we're going to use our Tim Holtz Distress Ink in tea dye for our clock embossing piece. So get that good and inked. We're just going to come in from the edge and do it lightly, that way we can just catch the embossing. We really only need to focus on the top half since we're going to be covering the bottom half with the foil tape. Okay, time to adhere the foil tape. It should be dry. If it doesn't seem dry to you, you can hit it with the heat tool. As we set that to the side to let it cool off, we're going to go ahead and start our sentiment on our scratch piece of paper. We're going to use the Tim Holtz Simple Sayings stamp set with Happy Birthday in tea dye. Then the frame, I'm going to go ahead and start with the frame and use my Ranger Archival ink in jet black. Doing this first allows me to be able to see where to place the happy birthday sentiment. Give that good pressure. And it's supposed to look funny, even though that the archival ink covers every nook and cranny. It's a distressed frame, so it works great. Apply the happy birthday using the tea dye. Place it on there carefully. Wonderful. Then we're going to fussy cut that. Okay, our foil tape is now cooled, so we'll go ahead and attach that with my favorite score tape. This does have a adhesive back on it, but I don't want to use that today. I like to keep it on there for this project because I think that it helps it hold the embossing better. Plus it doesn't affect the texture when you're trying to peel that off and then put it onto the card. A little bit more tape. Maybe a bit much. Okay, the way we're going to place that is we're going to make sure that it aligns with the very bottom. And the edges are going to overlap because we're going to wrap those. So applying pressure over those. And just rub without pushing down too hard so we don't affect the embossing. I'm going to flip it over and fold it right at the edge. The good thing about it being foil tape instead of paper is that it folds a lot easier over. We'll stick that to the edge. So there we go so far. Now we're going to bring in our ribbon, and it doesn't really matter where you place it as long as it covers the seam. So I'll take that, and just for good measure, I'm going to adhere some of it down with score tape before I use my tiny attacher on it. And then it will wrap around and get the tiny attacher. Okay, now we're going to attach this to our card base. Okay, now we're going to adhere our happy birthday. I'm going to pop up the card, so I'm not worried about having the happy birthday sentiment popped up, so I'm just going to apply that with some score tape. I seem to have not let my ink dry all the way, so I got a little bit of black ink in there, which is fine. Just go in there with my tea dye. There we go. The joy of distress is that it doesn't have to look perfect. So here I've used this card, but the paper that I'm using is Graphic 45's Proper Gentleman, which looks like this. So it has plenty of different cards to use. So today's card, I'm going to use this really cute little green one. And I'm going to adhere that with some foam tape. And with this, I like to attach the bottom of the car picture with the bottom of the tiny attachers. Make sure it's lined up at the top. And trim away that little bit of foam adhesive that was sticking out. Okay, now it's time to add the liner, which you could leave as is, or I have this really cute little 7 Gypsies stamp that says "You're not old, you're vintage." And all of it's got a nice pretty font, except for the vintage part has that nice vintage distressed look on it. So to make sure that we don't ruin our card or have to take the liner out, I'm going to stamp it on the liner before I place it into the card. Get that good and inked, and you can see that it's nicely inked, and you can see that distressing part in the word vintage. Because I like to write a lot in my cards, I'm going to put the sentiment at the top. There we go. Now I'm going to add that into the card base. This is cut to 4 by 5 1/4, so it needs a nice 1/8 of an inch border all the way around. And there we go. But as usual, I made this for Operation Right Home, so it's going to get my Gomont Creations by Jennifer stamp. And the Operation Right Home logo stamp on there as well. If you do cards for Operation Right Home, make sure that the stamp that you use says Operation Right Home on it instead of OWH, because if the person who gets the card looks up OWH, I think they end up with the Omaha World Herald, I think. Something like that. There we go. It is stamped and now ready to be put in an envelope and set and ready to go to OWH. So there we go. Happy birthday to the perfect vintage person in your life.